Hey, this is your host, 563 here. Just a quick note, the TAO Talk has moved to its own channel. All the links to follow us on Twitter and where to subscribe on YouTube can be found in this episode's description. Make sure you follow those links so you don't miss out on future episodes. Thanks.
Like Bittensor had 0 teams building on it 12 months ago and it has 50 plus today. Like that is like pretty absurd when you step back and look at it. And so like, what does that look like in 6, 12, 18 months? Like assume a lot more as we kind of scale up the number of subnets that can participate in the ecosystem. And even just outside of like adding more subnets, like mining's going to get more competitive, and like the Silicon Valley FANG guys are going to start mining on the weekends, you know? And like, just like as this whole flywheel kind of gets going, like I'm just hyped to see kind of the overall outputs kind of get better and better.
Welcome back to TAO Talk, a weekly blockmate show recapping all the news in the Bittensor ecosystem. I'm your host, 563, joined always by my co-host, Brody from On-Chain Outpost. Today we have some very special guests. We have Ronan and Derek from Collab+Currency. Thanks for hopping on, guys.
Appreciate you having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. Love the work you guys do, and excited to kind of talk about TAO and Bittensor.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, we were super pumped. Well, I was selfishly pumped to have you guys on because your piece, Running Bittensor, really is what set me over the edge on Bittensor, what TAO built me. I had been doing a ton of research into decentralized AI, and I was always pretty skeptical about Bitcoin or Bittensor, and you guys just laid it so flat. There weren't a lot of resources out there that really explained from tip to tail what Bittensor is going to be. And yeah, just thank you for putting that out there. But I'm just curious, from your perspective at Collab+Currency, what do you specifically like about Bittensor and TAO? What got you into it?
Yeah, Ronan, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I can say from like really early days, I think the number one thing that attracted us was like just the community and kind of like that like very obvious community formation. So like I think you had that big move in crypto AI kind of spring 23, and then it kind of died off in terms of interest and attention. And kind of early that fall, I really started getting bullish on crypto AI broadly. And, the Bittensor Discord was just like a hive mind of people sharing ideas, helping each other register miner keys, and just like generally shooting the shit about how to make Bittensor grow. And like that, like very obvious organic traction was just kind of like super, super cool to see in the space where, you don't see that a bunch. So that was the initial attraction, I would say.
Yeah, I'll piggyback there, and I'll kind of like revert back to something, a little Freudian slip that you just made, 563, when you said Bitcoin instead of Bittensor. And I remember I think the first time I heard about Bittensor was from Ronan. We were on a team retreat. I think we were on a bike ride, and I was talking about this project called Decred, which was if you guys are familiar, it's an old Bitcoin fork. They had this consensus mechanism that was hybrid proof of work, proof of stake. I got nerd sniped on it very early on, like maybe 5-6 years ago. But it was a clever way to kind of engineer commodity money and like use kind of the inflation of the system to create like a more secure, at the time, or at least articulate a more secure mechanism to bring digital commodity money to market. And Ronan told me that he had been like poking around the Discord of this project called Bittensor, which employed not from a security perspective, but like this hybrid proof of work, proof of stake system, but pointed towards kind of like intelligence. And we had already started like Ronan at the time was spending a lot of his time on AI, and we as a team have been thinking about synthetic intelligence and making AI investments in the years prior. But I would say like that was the thing that kind of like got me excited. And so, Bitcoin is a beautiful project. We are by no means like Bitcoin maximalists. We're not even Bitcoin mostmalists, but like this idea that you can organize labor around a job to be done. In the case of Bitcoin, it was to create and secure digital commodity money for the world over the internet, using inflation. That like kind of created this network effect of labor to come around that job to be done. It's compelling. And, a lot of what we do on the venture side is we invest in teams who build protocols or platforms or applications, but these are venture style projects. And I think the elegance of, the design decisions to do like a truly credible commodity money, which which Bitcoin did, which is like things like fair launch, fixed supply, a very open mining and public mining experience, then no pre-mine. These were decisions that like hadn't really been baked into a lot of the experimentation in the years since Bitcoin for a variety of reasons. It's like impossible to reproduce that original Genesis event. But Bittensor, had done a pretty decent job, kind of like running it back. And as we dug in a little bit, it became clear that there was something special going on around this mission-aligned goal of trying to take the same organizational labor and the incentive system of something like a Bitcoin and kind of trying to replicate the purity of the Genesis event and pointing it to this new category of intelligence that we thought was really interesting. And so Ronan and I I just remember we just started geeking out on it pretty hard at that point and getting conviction, talking to folks in the space, and the rest is kind of history.
That's really cool. I haven't really quite heard somebody talk so articulately about the purity of the Genesis event, kind of how you described, and have never really heard somebody articulate as that being one of the drivers to get them interested in the first place. It usually is around the community. So whenever you do see the combination of what you just described, plus the community, plus the fundamentals, plus the loss curves, plus all of the vocal people who are backing this with a lot of their reputation. You've got the Barry Silberts of the world backing this with his reputation. It's pretty crazy to see all of these kind of dimensions collide and converge, and bringing us, Bittensor in its current form, which has all of these catalysts, both from a fundamental perspective and just a cult perspective, that are on the horizon with all these different upgrades and functionality and the extensions of the usability of this protocol. So really cool. I really like that. I might borrow that.
Yeah, can I add one point to that? And we Ronan and I really tried to think very deeply about how to communicate this effectively, because to be super clear, like this idea of being able to parrot the kind of the economic formation of Bitcoin, I think we believe that was probably the single most important decision that Const and Alla could have made at the very earliest stages. There's this whole sector of our space right now that's kind of exploded in economic activity. It's like meme tokens, right? And I think it's very easy on first glance to like look at that category and say, like, it's garbage. There's nothing there. There's no way to underwrite this category. We aren't like at Collab, we're not meme coin investors out of the fund, although Ronan and myself and a lot of the team members think about this stuff pretty deeply. But one of the reasons that that's working is like blockchains are just a way to create markets around ideas. And if you can simplify an idea that de-risks its participation, you can aggregate labor like very quickly. And so it's not surprising to know that like early miners or early participants or early community members, which we think are like lagging indicators, started to form around this economy because of the decisions it made to replicate the kind of the memetics of Bitcoin, this 21 million fixed supply, this proof of work, proof of stake system, this idea of like total transparency in terms of like the fair launch, this idea of like openness in terms of like how the protocol will change and evolve as time goes on. In addition to kind of like the halvening and the how the inflation works over years, and it really de-risks communities to form around this thing. And it's the thing that we think creates kind of this lower bound outcome as time goes on, and we'll continue to kind of just like steamroll and get people excited about the economy and all the growth, the platform, and the intelligence markets that you can now underwrite as a result of like those foundational economic principles. But let me pause there. I'm like rambling at this point. Ronan's heard me kind of like go on these tangents. So Ronan, is there anything you want to add there in terms of like how we've thought about this early on?
No, I think that's dead on. And like those early design decisions were what gave the community like enough conviction to kind of stick around and kind of like build together. So it's like it's paired, but it's paired because the community is a result of those early design decisions, right? So I do think that's true. And I think another like kind of soft data point on this stuff is like you have kind of these groups that of like speculative miners, and I think you kind of see them kind of speculative mine a bunch of different protocols. And interesting, what you saw with Bittensor is like a lot of those speculative miners would kind of tout Bittensor as the one that they were more conviction mining, and it wasn't just like a speculative farm dump situation. And, just kind of another testament to those early design decisions.
That's really cool. And not to kind of continue to go down this tangent, but you're seeing just the community growth and formation around these fair launch tokens and manifest in other projects as well, such as Hyperliquid, and memes in general. Those are all, fair launched, and it all kind of allows people to participate in the upside of that token performance, which is amazing.
Yes.
And people are just getting TGE fatigue and all of that kind of stuff.
You're speaking our language. Like, we talk about this a lot at Collab, which is the shape of how venture works is clearly evolving to meet this technology where it's at, right? Like Hyperliquid, meme tokens. I'm sure you guys are following like the AI tokens. I'm forgetting the goat and the trees and like all of like these things didn't just happen in a vacuum. They happen because it's a response to like how we think this technology can best serve community networks forming around them. And so, we're not precious about following in the footsteps of like traditional venture as it's been applied to crypto in the past. Our job as venture investors of the future is to really lean into the highest and best use of how this technology operates to form communities and find projects with the heartbeat that we think is going to continue to get stronger as time goes on. So everything you're saying, Brody, is like philosophically, like really, like it aligns with how our strategy at Collab.
I love that. I love that you're innovating in that direction and thinking about markets differently. The meta from previous cycles are not the meta in this cycle. So
there you go.
Anyways, 563, should we move on to the things that we were meant to discuss?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, so let's go through the updates this week. Yeah, Brody, I know you wanted to talk about Manifold Labs. They hopped on Novelty Search this last week. What were they talking about?
Yeah, so Manifold Labs, they were on last week's Novelty Search, like 563 said. Rob and Josh were on there flexing their muscles, literally on there. Everybody was commenting on how big Josh's biceps were. So shout out to him. There was doubts going around that Manifold Labs doesn't ship because they spend too much time in the gym. So I'm not trying to FUD Manifold Labs, but no, getting into it, they were talking just about, all the products that they are launching, such as Targon V4, Sybil. They kind of gave a little bit of a demo there. For those of you who don't know, Sybil is like a Perplexity type meta search engine. I don't know if you've used Perplexity, but I was explaining to Derek and Ronan before this call how, there's a lot of different cool use cases that you can now, have on Perplexity that are probably going to, reach feature parity with Sybil here in the near future, which is really cool to see a decentralized version of Perplexity. They're talking about Targon Hub, which is basically just a marketplace for validators to sell bandwidth, and they leverage the Open API query schema. So it's super easy if you're using the Open API OpenAI API to go swap out your OpenAI API for the Targon API. Derek's laughing at me. Wow, that was a mouthful. Yeah, so all that's open source, and they were kind of teasing their roadmap. So they want to become more of a general LLM inference service, and the users will be able to lease from validators. And eventually they want to kind of return their validators into more of a community voting mechanism as well, similar to like Miners Union, Deter, and Tensorplex. So Manifold Labs, really cool to see all the stuff that they're demoing on last week's Novelty Search. And by the time we're recording this, somebody else will have done Novelty Search, and we'll talk about it next week. But do you have any comments on all that stuff?
I can jump in quickly. I think just this concept of like bandwidth utility, I think Sammy's calling it, which I really love, is like kind of starting to see signs across subnets, and like not just having like traditional monetization schemes for these validators, but basically using their underlying bandwidth, whether it be via voting or through direct monetization, is super interesting. So I like that, and I think we'll touch on the Macrocosmos stuff coming up here soon as well.
Yeah, the only thing I'll respond to there is, it's Ronan is so close to this stuff, and so I'm pinging him constantly just to get updates. But the amount of just stuff, like let's just call it stuff, that's now happening on this network is impossible to keep up with. And it's I think it's the sign of a very healthy economy. It's the sign of a growing ecosystem. We can talk about what kind of the ramifications of that, the optimization that's now happening will lead to as time goes on. But yeah, it's a exciting time, I think, to just be tracking and following these updates. So you guys are going to have your work cut out for you as the weeks go on.
That's why we're here, man. Yeah, speaking of updates, let's go to what Macrocosmos came up with this week. They released Gravity. So for folks that don't know, Macrocosmos, they have quite a few subnets. One of them is subnet number 13, Data Universe. And yeah, so these guys work on data scraping. And what Gravity allows validators to do is basically charge for their bandwidth, monetize that bandwidth. So folks that are out there that want to utilize this army of miners that are just scraping willy-nilly out there, they can aim them at specific things. So say you're really in the need of data for like the election, or really in the need for data from sports, you can like hit up some validators and ask them, please go scrape this. And this is just really exciting. And it goes back to Sammy's point about revenue generation for validators. What do you guys think about that? Do you think it's going to have to be one of the top priorities for these subnets to like actually turn a profit like right away, or is that like a later down the line thing?
I'll go quickly. I think it's really worth discussing today, and long run necessary for the Bittensor ecosystem and like economy to like thrive and succeed and be sustainable and all that. I do think it is a farther out problem than people kind of give it credit for. Just if you're kind of looking at the emissions curve today and TAO price today and stuff like this, like there's still like a lot of time to like experiment and play around and maybe tackle more of the AI research problems before you're trying to figure out the exact mechanisms in which you're going to like create a sustainable business out of it. I mean, realistically, subnets were launched a year ago, and like you're not at, these are like pre-product teams, and they're really just experimenting, and we think of them as like really like the early stage startups. So like when we're DDing really really early stage problems, we're not like over indexing on like their revenue and monetization avenues and schemes right out the gates. Like you want to get them finding product market fit, finding their consumers, and finding the demand. So long run, we do think this is the path forward, but I don't think it's as pressing as people might make it out to be.
Yeah, we had this. Oh no, you go, Brody.
Oh, I was just gonna mention really quickly, like I feel like there's been a vibe shift the past like month or two, that there's been this emphasis on creating these revenue models to fight back against the FUD from the larger community and larger crypto community. I don't know if you had any comments on that necessarily, but it feels like a recent movement.
We have a lot of thoughts on this. So when we wrote Running Bittensor, and we started writing this towards the end of 2023, and then started wrapping up in January and February early this year. But when we wrote that, the last paragraph of that piece, we had this section, and it was essentially just like this articulation that like true success of Bittensor inevitably would mean the intelligence that these subnets were extracting needed to like penetrate outside of the economy and start actually affecting like real world use cases and real world businesses, and like starting to make a small dent on like GDP, even if it was tiny to start. I think the larger optimization goals for both the OTF, for subnets in particular, they all recognize that that's the North Star, right? Like creating a circular economy where intelligence gets extracted over and over and over again through this miner validator subnet owner network, and having it escape like that energy escape the economy without returning value, like that obviously is not sustainable. I think the thing that like we recognize is this stuff takes time. Like we've been around for a long time. Like Collab+Currency is we've been investing in crypto since 2018, and a lot of like these early experiments, these early protocols, they were really good at getting people to tinker on them. They were really good at getting people to figure out like testing new things, creating toys, playing with the constraints in interesting ways. And as people play with this stuff, you're able to kind of like push code to kind of optimize or create funnels or to contain value in a way that like makes these things, sustainable. We're not there yet. Like this experiment, I mean, subnets were just launched a year ago, less. And so, this is no different than like, Ethereum starting out on proof of work and like having made multiple changes as time goes on to things like proof of stake, to this vertical scaling strategy, to figuring out what to optimize on, layer 1 versus offloading to layer 2s and beyond. And those are all the results of just like people playing around with this stuff and figuring it out, and deep research going into things about how to create like really interesting constraints as the system evolved. I think the important piece for people to remember that we always come back to is, as long as you can create like an economy that people want to continue to contribute to, which gets back to like that design decision of making Bittensor follow like this inflation schedule of Bitcoin. It's like very powerful. As long as you can get people to continue to contribute and underwrite the economy, everything else is plastic. Like everything else can change. And we've seen that going from 1 subnet to 32 subnets to 51 subnets to, we'll see hundreds of subnets in the future. And we're going to see that with things like DTAO and subnet tokens and this programmable EVM on top. These are all feature set upgrades that are going to like allow for the exploration for business models from validators to the rest of the world to actually happen. And the rest of it is just details and research and figuring it out. But we're enthusiastic that things are on the right track.
Love
Very
that.
well said.
Awesome. So let's switch gears a little bit to another friend of the show, Tensorplex Labs. They just launched their subnet over on 52, Dojo. These guys are working on human preference data. So you can think of that as like data labeling for data sets, getting some more richness into data, but they're also looking at how to help with like a validation service. So they're working alongside 3Gen, which is subnet 17, who do 3D generation. And if you think about products like 3D generation, it's kind of subjective. Like, how do you know this 3D image of a pencil is better than that 3D image of a pencil? It's kind of coming down to the eye of the beholder. So what you can do via Dojo is plug in humans into the loop, so you can get that instant feedback. And I'm curious what you guys think. Do you think this is something that's missing from Bittensor? Like, obviously, there are tons of validation mechanisms out there right now, reward mechanisms, coordination mechanisms, but there aren't too many like this that take outside help. Like anyone can plug in and provide some validation. How do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think at least on the Dojo side, I think it's super interesting for a couple of reasons. Because one, this is going to be kind of like one of the first examples where the barrier to participate is quite low, and like data labeling and setting human preference data is just functionally not like a very technically complex task. So it's going to be cool to allow like lower level people on this kind of technical ability scale to like get involved within the ecosystem. And so yeah, we're super excited about that. And broadly, I think what are the end use cases and what is the end demand for data labeling and human preference data? I think obviously large, the degree to which TBD, but this stuff is valuable in the training process and fine tuning process. And hopefully, maybe long run, we even see a situation where you're actually bringing in domain experts to start to label and express preferences over those domains that they have, background in. And then you can actually start to really, create models, and whether it be biology or whatever, right, that are for some end goal. So we're pretty excited. And also we are investors in Tensorplex as well.
Yeah, Ronan, do you want to just add some thoughts on like what Tensorplex is doing broadly?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so Tensorplex initially, right, they kind of launched the canonical liquid staking token for TAO on Ethereum, and then they actually built a multi-layer bridge from kind of the Bittensor palette to, sorry, not the palette, from Subtensor to the Ethereum environment. And basically now with a bridge, you can actually start to get, trust minimized liquidity on Ethereum from Bittensor, which is kind of like a big unlock. But going forward, they're going to have some unlocks with the EVM environment, and actually having a liquid staking token on a native Bittensor EVM environment. Couple that with the Dojo subnet, they're kind of doing everything up the stack. But yeah, that's high level what Tensorplex is doing.
Yeah, we had CK on the show. Was it show 3?
Yeah.
I don't remember. Yeah. And it was his first podcast appearance and he killed it. And it was really cool to hear his opinions on and articulations of what Tensorplex is doing and kind of the opportunities that they see in the market. Yeah, we met him out in Singapore as well for Token, and they're always pushing out, cool research and analysis. They're doing a cool new series where they're kind of going through and giving an analysis on different subnets. They just did Subnet 13, I believe. And yeah, just overall, really, really great guys, really great team, and really like what they're doing over there.
Yeah, it's interesting to see them kind of, take on this role of like information aggregation for, kind of all the different subnets, because like nobody's going to be able to keep up. And like as a liquid staking provider, as a validator, providing this kind of like info and insight into the community and like where value is being created, I think is like a really good top of funnel approach for them. So
yeah, I'll say one thought too. Just Ronan and I got a chance to grab breakfast with those guys when we were out in Singapore, the Tensorplex guys, and in addition to all the cool stuff they're doing with Dojo and the LST and just like the protocol initiatives that they're kind of expanding into, the thing that I left very impressed with for both of those guys, both the founders, was their commitment to bumping into problems at the subnet level and being able to relay feedback to hopefully get changes incorporated to the core protocol as time goes on. And we've noticed this from other subnet owners as well, and other folks that are building on top of Bittensor. There is this enthusiasm to kind of work, like they're all steering their own ships, and they want them to steer in the same direction. And they're willing to go above and beyond to work with the OTF and with the core protocol designers to kind of like give feedback and like work with them closely to kind of make changes and even throw in and chip in and help on code. And so it's exciting for us to kind of like see that happening and kind of like renews our enthusiasm for the overall economy.
Yeah, it's really impressive the quality of teams already building on Bittensor. Speaking of, wanted to touch upon Omega's new update. These guys, Omega, their multimodal data set at a subnet 24, pretty cool. They reached #1 most downloaded data set in their category. So a huge shout out to the Omega Labs team over on HuggingFace, by the way. So what do you guys think about this? Do you think this is the type of recognition or the type of thing that gets recognition from the normal AI developer space, is getting leaderboard spots on HuggingFace?
We've talked a lot about the HuggingFace leaderboard, but Ronan, do you want to chime in with some thoughts?
yeah, I think these are all like super good proof points for like Bittensor creating real value. I think one thing that has been happening more recently within the ecosystem is there's like some claim of some achievement with like we'll call it like murky or like somewhat like hard to quantify verifiability. Like this is kind of more straightforward in that it's like downloads and that's like very quantifiable. But like some of the other stuff like benchmarking or like model performance and stuff like this is not as straightforward. In creating kind of unified standards and like unified ways to showcase this is, I think, like a really important need within the Bittensor ecosystem, and we might be cooking on something in this direction soon. So stay tuned. But yeah, this is super cool. And in terms of Hugging Face leaderboard, I'm rocking the new research sweatshirt right now, and we got really excited by them, pushing that fine tuning subnet earlier in the year. But yeah.
There's a core insight in one of the questions that you're asking 563, which is like, is this the thing that's going to get people excited broadly that are outside Bittensor to get interested in Bittensor? And the answer is like, it could be. I will say like there's a lot of shots on net to do that. And like one thing, I mean, we've got I don't know how familiar you guys are with Subnet 17. We can talk about those guys for a minute. 404, sure. They're the 3gen subnet. I mean, I think the overarching like thing that we come back to is like there's a lot of subnets pointed their intelligence towards lots of different industries, and like today, let's just say like the 80-20 of subnets are really focused on like the core ingredients to intelligence. But like 3gen is like, it's interesting to us because the impact that it could have on traditional gaming, traditional media, like the way like websites and immersive environments and extended reality, which we consider to be, a huge main theme, starts to propagate. Like it can have an influence on these categories that like are actually touching consumers day to day. like in not too distant future. So if for just like as a level set into context, to open up the context window a bit, what 3Gen is doing is it's essentially a subnet for extracting like 3D geometry. And like that 3D geometry is created by miners, it's created by validators, and then it can enter into all sorts of different places. So we've got a portfolio company right now that's reviewing how to essentially incorporate the basically a natural language generator inside of their immersive environment, so that as you're building out an immersive environment, you can pull in 3D objects very quickly that are basically being created by TAO inflation. The cool thing about the 3Gen network is, in the meantime, miners are also creating and validators are also grading just this constant supply of 3D objects that are getting created, to the point where the assets that they've aggregated since launching, it now represents, I think, the second largest 3D asset marketplace on planet Earth, like in not very much time, which is insanely impressive. And I know a lot of that team's goals over this next quarter is to both pipe into some major providers for how that geometry, those 3D objects can pipe into applications. But it's also to pipe into this asset marketplace that will allow people to engage with all of like the miner created objects that are persistently getting created in that subnet. And so you can imagine like the world's largest 3D asset marketplace where people can grab and buy and grade and pull in 3D objects to new immersive environments or XR applications, basically coming from like a Bittensor subnet in the future. And we don't think stuff like that's crazy. And so these are the types of like real world impact that we think are, we can talk a little bit about, pipes that can get created through the core protocol to like allow that transactional revenue to flow back into Bittensor in some capacity. But as of right now, it's like directionally we're heading to this world where the intelligence that's being extracted from these subnets, we think is going to start to impact some of like these real world outcomes in like the not too distant future. And 3Gen and some of these other subnets, I think, are right on the heels of that vision.
And just to touch on the leaderboard component real quick, I mean, obviously super great. And like these are kind of an honor within the AI community, especially the open source AI community. But like at the end of the day, like, once we get into a dynamic TAO world, it's going to be a skin in the game sort of free market system where like the leaderboard is your emissions weight. And that's like the true determinant of like, you can call it success or whatever, PMF or what at least the community and TAO holders are deeming that. So really excited for that sort of like much more quantifiable skin in the game kind of leaderboard in that sense.
Ronan said ball up top.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the topics I had. But I did want to close with this, guys. What are the things that make you the most excited when you think about Bittensor? What's coming around the corner? What are you excited about?
You want to ball up top, Ronan?
Sure. I mean, there's a bunch, right? So like I mentioned, the programmable EVM environment, that's going to be awesome. Obviously, dynamic TAO in whatever form that comes is going to be awesome. But like at the end of the day, I think like just like stepping back, and I posted a tweet like kind of in this vein earlier when people are like kind of pontificating or like talking about what crypto AI can and will look like Bittensor had 0 teams building on it 12 months ago and it has 50 plus today. Like that is like pretty absurd when you step back and look at it. And so like, what does that look like in 6, 12, 18 months? Like assume a lot more as we kind of scale up the number of subnets that can participate in the ecosystem. And even just outside of like adding more subnets, like mining is going to get more competitive, and like the Silicon Valley Fang guys are going to start mining on the weekends, and like just like as this whole flywheel kind of gets going, like I'm just hyped to see kind of the overall outputs kind of get better and better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'll also just say to that last point, Ronan saying that 7,200 daily emissions as more subnets scale out. The hunt is on. It's like the markets are gonna really become quite efficient in terms of like where that inflation flows. The talent here is going to continue to kind of like come into the space and compete for this valuable object that you can earn for doing proof of work. And watching that system unfold, that like organic weird network shapeshift into kind of really positive directions, like we love this stuff. Like this is why we do what we do. It's like fun to see these things start from zero and turn into, value creating networks that can have an impact on, how culture evolves, how the world evolves, how GDP is impacted. And we think the network is doing a great job of staying weird and continuing to evolve into higher ground. And we're just stoked to kind of watch and follow along.
I'll add one more thing, just kind of more specifically on dynamic TAO, right? Like, as you have this like open market competition for emissions, not decided by kind of like the top 64 validators, subnets are going to have to prove like to the community like their value. And so if that's due marketing, if that's due like better showcasing of what they're doing, if that's due more digestible documentation, right, it's going to be like a kind of a push on all fronts, which I just think is going to be, super, super valuable for like awareness and understanding of Bittensor as a whole. And, the game theory dynamics of how like emissions get decided is going to be super sick to watch. So
the Hunger Games of synthetic intelligence.
Let's go.
Yeah, it's basically going from 0 marketing firms to 50 instantly.
Exactly.
So love it. Hyped, guys. But this was a lot of fun. Derek, Ronan, really appreciate you guys joining us today. Where should folks go if they want to learn more about what you guys are working on?
Yeah, you can learn more about us at Collab+Currency.com. There's no and, just COLLABCURRENCY.com. We've got all the portfolio companies that we work with. You can learn a little bit more how we think about the world. If you're building on Bittensor, which if you're watching this podcast, you're either thinking about it or you are, reach out to Ronan. Ronan is spending a lot of his time in this ecosystem. So definitely reach out to Ronan on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter as well. I think you guys will probably have that in the show notes. Yep. But yeah, thanks for having us on here, and we're excited to be a part of this community and to keep contributing in ways that we can.
Thank you so much, guys. That was awesome.
Yeah, thanks you all for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to the TAO Times newsletter if you want an even deeper dive into this week's updates. And if you want to join in on the conversation, come join us in the Blockmates Discord. See y'all next week.
Nothing here is financial advice. It's for entertainment and educational purposes only. Always do your own research or speak to a financial advisor before making any investment decisions.